Welcome back. Happy Saturday, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Comics and Stuff. My name is Devin. I am your host, as always. Welcome and thank you for tuning in. Today, we are going to be doing a deep dive into collectible video games and how that entire market works, which I am completely ignorant of. But fortunately for us today, I do have a special guest, my dear friend Rui from Driving Forward Collectibles. Rui, come on in. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for
Good.
having me.
Perfect. Well, thanks for being here. I really do appreciate it. You are one of the, at least in my eyes, one of the bigger guys in the video game collectible community. I mean, you have an insane collection. And for those of you who maybe aren't super familiar with you, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So obviously, my name's Rui. I live up here in nice and cold Canada. It's not always
Beautiful.
cold, but most of the time. Yeah, I've been a passionate collector for as long as I can remember. Started off with hockey cards when I was really young with my brother, then evolved into comic books, and then it just reached a point where from comics I went to video games, and now I just collect. I collect anything that I find interesting, anything that strikes that nostalgic nerve that you have,
All right.
and yeah,
Jack of all trades sort of deal. Can
yeah,
collect a little bit
pretty
of
much.
everything. I can
Yeah.
appreciate that. So now, what I guess before we get too far into the video games, what is Driving Forward Collectibles? Where does that name come from? What is that to you?
You know what? That's a funny it's a funny question because I was introduced to Instagram while I was oddly enough having my car wrapped by my friend Jimmy, and he knew I was really into comic books, and he told me, he was like, "Oh, you should have an Instagram account and like post your collection. That way you meet other like-minded people, right?" This is back in like 2011, 2012.
Okay, so way
Um,
back in the day.
yeah, exactly. In the beginning, I think if you scroll all the way down to my page, you'll see like a few pictures of the car I had at the time, a Lexus IS 300, and I had a few pictures of that. And then I started posting a couple of books here and there. But because I started with the car, I wanted my name to have something car related, but also motivational. So I was thinking,
Okay.
okay, you got to be like driven forward, right? Always look forward, always keep going, right? That kind of mentality, and that's where the name driven forward, driving forward, however people like to pronounce it, that's basically where it came from, and I just stuck with it.
Okay, I love it to death. That's awesome. So now, tell me a little bit about. Now, I know you just mentioned you started in hockey, and then you went to comic books, and then to video games. Now you have a pretty substantial comic book collection, which is actually how you and I met. You and I met because we were part of the comic group at Yaniv's wedding a couple years back. So how did you have a really big book? You got like a Superman 1 hiding somewhere? I think I remember hearing about that. Yeah. Okay, back there on the shelf. I see it. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So now how did you make that transition from comic books into video games? What happened there?
Yeah, so I guess it really started when I don't know why. It was like a weekend, and for some reason, I think it was maybe an article or a YouTube video or something that I was watching, and it was talking about a game that I used to love when I was a kid, Bucky O'Hare for the NES,
Mhm.
and I was just like, man, you know what? I would love to fucking play that again. But not like on an emulator or anything. I wanted to play it like I wanted to hold that controller. I wanted to experience it the way I experienced it when I was a kid, right?
Mhm.
So I jumped on Kijiji. Kijiji is like a marketplace up here, similar
I was
to
gonna
your
say, what is
Craigslist.
Kijiji?
Yeah. It's basically Craigslist in Canada, essentially, right?
Mhm.
And so I jumped on there and I started looking through some ads and stuff. And then, luckily enough, that weekend there was a swap meet, same city that I lived in. So took down the address and I head over there. And that's when I was just like,
It just
what the hell is this? I had no idea that there was this type of community out there. You know what I mean? These collectors of these old games that we used to play and shit when we were young, right? So initially, it just started off as something where it was like I want to collect. Not even I wasn't even really looking at it from a collection standpoint at that time. It was more just I wanted to fulfill something that was inside me, right? That nostalgia. And so I just started buying the games that I had when I was a kid, you know, Mario 3, Super Mario Brothers, Bucky O'Hare, stuff like that. And I just was playing them, right, and enjoying it. And then as I dove a little bit deeper into it, I started seeing, I'll be aware this back in 2012 that hey man, some of these games have value, right? You know, $500, right? I think at the time the biggest one was like, you know, stadium events, right? And back then you're spending like 2K to get a cart, right? So I was like, shit, there's some value to this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then as I researched more and more, I started learning about, you know, how rare some of these were, the history behind them, why they were rare.
You went down the rabbit hole.
I went down the rabbit hole hard, like really, really hard. And then, you know, just like anyone else, you start jumping on eBay and you start, you know, digging around and trying to find what you want, what interests you, right? And whenever it comes to collecting, I'm one of those guys where what you know, what tickles my fancy, I guess, is rarity, right? I like the rare stuff, right? Not necessarily the most popular stuff, but something that's rare, because in my opinion, I don't know, to me, that's what I think will always maintain its value at the very least, right? Because it has that going for it, right? Yeah, it may not be the most popular title, but it's rare, right? Like there's only so many out there, right? So it's that's got to force it to hold on to some type of value, right? And so I just kind of took that approach towards video games. And yeah, in the beginning, you know, I only wanted loose carts, you know, that's all I was interested in, didn't care about the box or anything like that. And then, you know, you start meeting other collectors, and then you start seeing their collections, what they collect, why they collect it. And then you start evolving, right? You go into complete in box. From complete in box, you start looking into sealed. You know, from sealed, you go to like different consoles, like some that you may not have even owned, right?
That's what I'm curious about. Those are some things I'd really like to get into, because I am not now, nor have I ever been much of a gamer. If anything, I've always gone to and stayed at Nintendo. I have forayed into the world of like Sony or Microsoft with like Xbox or PlayStation, but I have stayed a Nintendo kid through and through to my heart, and that is only ever really been mostly Pokemon, Zelda, you know, Kirby stuff. But so my knowledge in this stuff is really kind of basic, but I appreciate that you really kind of went down that rabbit hole and like found a passion, and like you really took the time to like research it and learn it, and that is why I have you here, because these are things that I want to understand. Now, I guess in that facet, what are some of your top games in your collection? Just you know, in terms of your favorites or value, or both perhaps. What are some of the really cool ones that you want to show off?
Yeah. So for me, as I dove down that rabbit hole, I started learning about new variants, new things about games that I already liked, right? So like Super Mario Brothers, the original one. You know what I mean? Everyone's played that game, right?
And that's like the big one too, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. At the time, for us older collectors, you know, we didn't necessarily, it was a small group of people that knew about these different boxes and different, you know, versions of the boxes, and why they changed and how they changed. It wasn't common knowledge back then, right? So so for me, as soon as I discovered that, right, I started kind of going further down and trying to get, you know, the earliest one, right? Because the rarity of it, right? And so for me, my goal for you know, retro video game collecting was always to get a matte sticker Mario Brothers, because with matte sticker Mario Brothers, it's unique in the sense that even though it was the, you know, I'm pretty sure that that's the highest selling NES game, NES title. Even though it's the highest selling title, this first print essentially of the matte sticker, it goes back to like there's kind of like an interesting story behind it, right? So when Nintendo emerged in the US, it was like right after the video game crash, right? So people were wary about video games and, you know, home console stuff like that. So Nintendo wasn't exactly too sure about what was going to happen. So they did these test launches, and the first one they did was in New York, and they weren't really prepared type of reception that they were going to get, right?
Hmm.
So it's still not 100% confirmed, but I've heard different numbers thrown out there. But I've heard the number 10,000. So 10,000 units of this matte sticker Mario came out during this test launch, and they went quick. Like, I mean,
Right, and
super quick.
10,000 itself is like it's a big number if you're talking about like money, but 10,000 copies is very minuscule, right? That's a very small print run, right? So
Well,
that
to
is
give you,
exceedingly difficult and
oh
rare to
yeah,
find. Yeah,
yeah. As soon as those were done, they had to come up with the second print. So the second print, instead of using that same matte sticker to hold the flap down, they used a gloss sticker. So the number on the gloss sticker, I've heard everything from 70,000 to 100,000 units. So it just goes to show you the difference in, how many units separate it, right? It's a massive number.
right.
To date, I think, I think Wada Games, the last time I checked, I think they've graded maybe just under 20 or around 20 matte sticker seals. And
Wow.
that's it. That's all they've graded so far that they've released in the census. So
Okay.
so as a collector, right, I was just like, okay, one of my favorite games of all time. It's got everything going for it, that rarity, right? It's got the nostalgia factor. I gotta find one of
Gotta
these.
have it.
Yeah, gotta have it. But the thing is, by the time I came around to it, it was people knew, right? Most people, collectors, they knew, right? If it's got that matte sticker, that's it. This thing is worth a lot of money. I lucked out. I really, really lucked out. Like, this is like right when the pandemic hit. I was on eBay on my phone first thing in the morning, like usual, checking out my saved listings, and yeah, this one came up, but it didn't say matte sticker seal. It just said sticker seal. Pictures weren't the clearest or anything like that, but I'm zooming in like crazy and I'm looking,
Trying to
and I'm
really
like,
scrutinize those images.
it's tough, right? And at the same time, you also don't want to message the guy and be like, hey, is this a matte sticker or a gloss sticker? Can I get better pictures? Because I don't want him to like research it and then increase the price.
Yep.
So I kind of took a gamble. I took a gamble on it. He had $1,000 asking, and we ended up working out a deal for 700, which was a bit of a gamble because if it did end up being a gloss sticker, it still would have been worth it, but I wouldn't have been happy with it. So, anyways, game comes in. I open up the box, and sure enough, it's a matte sticker seal.
Ooh, beautiful.
So
okay.
I was thrilled when it's torn off. There's only about half the sticker there. So
But
the
it's
game
there.
itself, it's there. So the game itself is not sealed, obviously, right?
Right.
It indicates that from the graded, but they call this, and I'll send pictures after and stuff. But it says matte sticker seal, hang tab, no NESGP. There's so many other little factors in it, right? So as these versions came out, they started including certain codes and things like that all over it, right? And even like the manual itself, it's missing two aspects to it. I believe it's a date and another code. That's the first print manual, right? So you can't just pull any manual to complete this
Right, you
if
need
you're
that
trying to
specific
complete
one.
it.
Okay.
The card itself has to be a specific card, right? With only so many screws in it. Just there are certain things associated with it, right? Because I think there's something crazy like 10 or 12 versions of this game that were released overall.
See, I didn't even
So
know that.
yeah, this is my grail. That's
your baby.
That's my baby. This was
What's
the one.
what's the grade on that guy? I can't quite see it.
So it's low grade. It's only a 3.5, but it's got some potential. So the box itself is beat. This thing is
Right.
beat. You'll even see the hang tab is completely gone on it.
Mhm.
Right. So it's really, really beat in that sense. But the cart itself was graded an 8. The manual is only graded at 3.0 because the manual that came with it has like a chunk of the front
Right.
page torn out. So it's also kind of a project for me, right? So I've been searching and looking for a better manual, but these manuals are so hard to find. But if I can find a nice manual that's maybe an 8 and hell like a 9, then the overall grade would go up on the entire thing itself. But I'm also just
So
at
can
that
you like
point where
switch? Can you switch those out? Like I know that like in comic books,
yeah,
if you were to put like a page from one book into another book that gives you like a restored thing, and they're married or whatever, and you get the purple restored. Is that how that works with video games, or is it a little different because you can do? How do you know? Like,
so you can, right? Because so with a complete in box grade, it takes the average, right? So they inspect the cart, they inspect the manual, they inspect the box. So as long as all three pieces match that print or that variant, that's what they go off of. So if I find a better manual, I can crack that open, resubmit it with the better manual, and get a completely different grade on it, right? The grade might jump to a 4.5, right? If the manual brings the average up high enough. And it's not considered restored. It's not considered what we call qualified in the comic book world or anything like that, because it all belongs. It all belongs at the end of the day.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, that's definitely a little more different. So now, you're talking about these variants. So there's the matte sticker, the gloss sticker, and I don't know how far forward from the first inception of video games into the future. I don't know how far forward those different variants go, but can you tell me? I guess Nintendo kind of dominated the market back in the day when video games were, when Super Mario was first coming out, when Legend of Zelda was first coming out. I don't know if there were any major competitors that also had games coming out that are equally rare and or valuable. And then can you also talk to me a little bit about different variants or printings of games? How can you tell these things? Because I see different things like red sticker Zelda or like the matte sticker Mario or gloss sticker. How do you figure these things out, and how do you know which is which?
Yeah, so thanks to the internet, there's some
Yes.
guides and things like that that will kind of let you know what variant you have. But basically, so like with Super Mario, the first variant was 85 when it was released.
Okay.
And then they kept making different variants all the way up to like 91, where there's no more hang tab. It's just completely shrink wrapped and like the plastic hang tab to put it on the store display. So with these different variants, there are different things to look at, right? Is there a hang tab? Is there the NES GP code on the back left hand corner? Is there the NES GP in brackets in the bottom section here, right? The oval, for example, changed. So the gold oval ended up changing to a different shape, different color, everything. So different combinations of this determine what variant, what print it is, right?
Okay.
And yeah, there's guides and everything on it, right? And as games became more popular and they had to, keep producing them, they were forced to make these little changes essentially.
So it's such a subtle thing that you don't really think about. It's like I didn't realize that there were different variants of games until the graded video game community really came to like the forefront of collectibles. I had no idea. So now then, if say that, okay, so for Mario, just since that's the biggest one, if there's the first print in 85, the matte sticker, which could be a bazillion dollars, because I know that there's been copies that have cost like $100,000 or even more at this point, I think. Now take that and go to maybe the last copy they printed in 1990.
I'm not hearing you. Your mic is muted.
There we go. Is that a little better?
Yeah, that's better.
I apologize. That is my bad. So I'm sorry. What I was saying was for example, with that Super Mario first print, the matte sticker being way back in 85, and then going all the way forward to the last printing of Super Mario's in 91, is there a huge chasm of difference in price between those two copies, or are people going to pay somewhat similar? Because I know that like there's been some copies of it that have sold for $100,000 or whatever have you. What's the difference between those two far apart copies? What do you have any idea?
It's kind of hard to determine, right? So you have, I guess it really depends on the collector and what they're willing to spend and what their own preferences. So you can have like a later a mid-range, middle of the pack print, right? So not the newest and not the oldest, but in the middle, but it's completely sealed, super high grade, looks awesome. You might that copy might sell for higher than a print that's 2 versions earlier, but a little less in grade. You would think that that earlier print would sell for more, right? But some people prefer, that higher grade. It's sealed. It looks mint. It's super clean, right? So the market's kind of all over the place when it comes to that. But typically, the earlier the print, higher the grade. That's going to fetch the most back, right? So there is like a sealed still. There's a couple of sealed gloss sticker Mario's out there, and those hit crazy numbers.
Oh, I bet, because that's the second print, right? The gloss sticker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, outside of Mario, so everybody knows Mario's the biggest. That was the the first big successful video game franchise, one of the longest running in the world. Outside of Mario and say like Zelda or Pokemon, because those are such big franchises. What are some other like I guess what other games should folks be looking for in terms of rarity, collectability, desirability? What else is really out there for folks, or what sort of niche crowds are there in the video game community that like I wouldn't know about?
Yeah, it's evolved ever since grading kind of came to the forefront. So back in the day, when I started collecting, the pinnacle, the big games to get weren't necessarily the most popular titles, right? The most expensive ones were like stadium events, Flintstones, Dinosaur Peak, Little Samson, Panic Restaurant. And I'm saying these names, and some people probably have never even heard of them. But
those are some
but
very strange titles, except for the Flintstones. I know the Flintstones.
Yeah, the diehard collectors, we know what they are because those were the rarest NES titles that came out. And what most of them have in common is they were all very late releases. So they were released near the end of the console's lifespan. So the NES continued on about 2 or 3 years after the SNES was released. So during this time, they were still releasing new games, but the SNES was already taking over. So these were lower print runs. Some of them were like Blockbuster exclusives. So they were just really tough titles to get. So that's what was a prized possession back then. They still have held their value. There still is, in the collector world, a want for those titles. But with grading, things have shifted slightly where what's fetching the big dollars, what people want is the popular titles sealed. Popular titles sealed in high grade, those fetch big numbers, right? So like the Super Marios, the Legend of Zelda, Metroids, right? The stuff that's really common knowledge. Yeah. That kind of stuff, right? It fetches good numbers, right? Contra, all of that kind of stuff. If it's sealed, boom, yeah, you got a winner for sure. But then you do have the others that still like that super rare stuff, right?
Right. Well, now in terms of so I guess for those titles that you listed off, those would have potentially had smaller print runs as well, since they were coming up towards the end of just the NES's lifespan. Yes, is that maybe accurate as well? That they're harder to find because of that.
Yeah. Okay. Played a huge factor.
Okay. And now with Nintendo going into like the 90s, and I off the top of my head, I don't know when the first PlayStation or Xbox became a thing, or anything with Sega as well, because I know Sonic is one of Mario's biggest rivals. Do you know like what's the difference between Sonic and do you want to also, once you're done with that, touch on maybe how did handheld gaming like the Game Boy Color change that I guess the industry, and what's up with Game Boy Color games? Because I know that. Well, let's focus on Sonic first. Tell me about Sonic. Is that in the same range as Mario, or is that kind of
It's no. It's there's a lot of value, right? So what happened in the early 90s? So Sega was around even during the NES lifespan. They had the Sega
Mm,
Master System, not nearly as popular, right? Really,
right.
really niche. In Europe and Japan, a lot more popular there, but here in North America, no, right? I literally didn't even know anyone that owned a Sega Master console. But they were already starting to make their name within the video game industry, right? Uh, but it was when they released the Genesis, that's when things blew up, right? And
Right.
you have to remember that the Genesis was released like a couple of years before the SNES. So you had kids, Nintendo kids at home like me playing the NES, and maybe a couple of doors down, you had a kid playing a 16-bit console like the Genesis that just blew the NES out of the water, right?
Right.
So that started gaining popularity, right? And then they released Sonic, and Sonic was all about this, being really fast. He was cool, right? He wasn't some Italian plumber jumping around trying to save this princess every time, right?
Jumping
He
on
had cool
mushrooms, killing turtles.
friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, he brought this entirely new dynamic, right? But it was interesting because then once the SNES came out, it was they were able to duke it out, right? It was comparable, right? At the end of the day, I'm a Nintendo guy, so I had an NES, I had an SNES, and so I was on the Nintendo side, right? Even to this day, I still am. I respect the
Oh
Sega
yeah.
Genesis, definitely. There's some great titles. It's a very good console. But just overall, I think the SNES was a much better system. But what was interesting was suddenly you have these two teams. You have the Nintendo
Right.
team and you have the Genesis team, right? And they equally had their amount of fans that were just as passionate. I have cousins that they didn't have the SNES, but they loved that I did because they were able to play the SNES games when they came over my house, and vice versa. I went over there and I got to play Sonic, right? And
Right.
and it was really cool, but it did create this divide. But even with that divide, to this day, you have people collecting the Genesis games because that nostalgia, right? That that's what they grew up with. That's what they had. And although Sonic doesn't fetch the same level of money that the original Mario games would fetch, to find a sealed first print Sonic the Hedgehog for Genesis, yeah, you you got some
There's
money.
going to be
You got
some
some
money.
decent money.
That's
Oh
gonna
yeah,
that's gonna really set you back. Okay.
for sure,
So
for sure.
now, here's one that this is just a me thing that I'm curious about. Oh, actually, two-prong question. First one, for back to Sonic really quickly. What is uh what is a for a first Sonic game? Are there also first printings, second printings, and are they also going to be in the same dollar range as Mario, or just kind of getting up there? Like, are there multiple printings though? Is that a big thing?
Yep. There are
Yep.
a couple different printings with the Sonic game. Covers looked different, everything in that
Okay.
sense. The early prints, if you have a sealed early first print, yeah, that's the most desired. That's what collectors are looking for, because you got to think about it.
Right.
Someone, just the thought that someone out there had a Genesis and had this game and didn't even open it or play it is just, it's insane, right? Like, this is
I'm
Sonic.
starting to see a pattern
Why
here.
wouldn't you? Yeah, why wouldn't you do it?
Okay.
But one of the things to keep in mind with Genesis is, because of the cases, they weren't boxed cases, right? So for
Mhm.
Sonic the Hedgehog, they were that plastic case. So these were often kept, whereas the NES games and SNES games, the boxes were thrown out
Mm,
because they were
mhm.
just box, right? But these Genesis cases, they were cool, they were hard, like you wanted to keep them, you wanted to put your games back in them. So because there are a lot of complete copies out there compared to the Nintendo ones, it the and because the grades are typically higher because they're just harder to damage, you
Right.
do see that difference in value because of that factor.
Okay. Now let me jump. I'm gonna come completely to a different place in video game collecting. Video game guides. Tell me about that. I don't. I know that game guides weren't a big thing up until you start getting into Game Boy Color games. Because you could get your when Pokemon Yellow came out, you can go get the Pokemon Yellow official game guide. How do game guides figure into this? Is that something that's big and valuable, or is that something that's kind of on the back burner? You have the game guide or not, like whatever have you.
I think it comes down to personal preference. There is definitely value in them because, we're talking about pre-internet.
Right.
If you got stuck in a game, and I don't know about you personally, but if I got stuck in a game, it would torture me, right?
Oh
I
yeah.
had to figure it out. And, this is pre-internet. You can only figure that out if someone tells you, or you get the guide. So those guides hold a big nostalgia, right? People looking through them to figure out what to do next.
I have got a good story for you and the internet. So the first time that I ever got in trouble and like grounded and like in serious trouble was on my Game Boy Advance. I was playing The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, when it was reprinted for the Game Boy Advance. Because it came out originally for the NES or SNES, whatever. And I was on the third boss of the game. No game guide, was just trying to figure it out. And it was the worm boss that would go in like little S's and it would bump you off the platform. And every time you'd get bumped off, you'd die and you have to go back up. And I'd been at it for like 2 days. And this is me, like, I was a little kid. I was like in the 4th grade, I think. And I just was getting so frustrated. And I'm sitting there and I finally get bumped off. And it was just the last straw. And you just hear me audibly, a little kid, just go, "Fuck." And immediately you hear from the other room, you hear my mom, "What was that? What did you just say?" I lost my game. I was like grounded forever. Like that was the first time I ever cussed in my whole life. I will never forget that moment because I had never really said a bad word, but I had heard them, and I just got so angry that so yes, internet's the first time I ever got in trouble. Was thanks to Legend of Zelda. So needless to say, A Link to the Past became probably one of my biggest inspirations for continuing down my path of nerddom. Legend of Zelda Minish Cap, probably my hands down favorite Legend of Zelda game of all time. I think is the best. It should have continued.
Classic.
It's just so good. Actually, fun fact. So I still have my original Legend of Zelda Minish Cap complete in box. Like I loved it so much I never threw the box away or any of the pamphlets or anything. So I have it still complete in box. And actually, let's kind of touch on Game Boy Color and how that changed things up, because I remember Game Boy Color games when I first started collecting my video games. I have a very small video game collection. I just wanted to get the original games that I had when I was a kid so I could play them whenever I wanted. So, I've got Pokemon Yellow, Gold, Silver, Crystal, Link's Awakening DX, Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons, Link to the Past, Kirby Return to Nightmare in Dreamland, and Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, all complete in box. And I got those all for like $40, $30 a pop, maybe $50 a pop. And now those are $200, $300, $400 each, complete in box. How do you think Game Boy and the advent of the handheld console, like how did that change game collecting? Like that was a huge thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like I remember when I was a kid, right? You were limited. If you wanted to play a video game, you had to, have a TV dedicated to it. You had to have a system, and you had to do that, right? And depending on what you had access to, right? If there was only one TV in the house, you weren't able to just play a game whenever you wanted, right? You had to get up extra early before everyone else to get a couple of hours in, right? And things like that. So yeah, you were limited, right? But once, the Game Boy came out, that changed everything. Now you have your own little, video game system in your hand, and you can just go up to your room and play. You're in the car, you can play. There's no longer any, those limits were completely gone, right? And, depending on, the income of your house, for some people, they weren't even able to get a home console because it was too expensive, right? So, but now they were able to get a handheld because, it was quite a bit cheaper, right? So a lot of kids were first. Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
kids were first introduced to video games, or their own, they owned their own personal video game. A lot of them was the Game Boy, the Game Boy Color, things like that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
played a huge role.
yeah, I definitely came from one of those households who could not afford those bigger consoles and the big TV. So my first console ever was it was a Game Boy Color, and I had to wait like 2 years after all the other kids had them to get my own, and so it was very satisfying to get one. I'll tell you that much. But okay, so now getting into the future of just the video game collecting community, grading and stuff like that. I would assume that this comes down to personal preference, but objectively, do you think, what is sealed or complete in box? Like sealed is cool, but complete in box you can still play. Like, do you know if there's much of a balance between the two, or do people prefer one over the other, generally speaking?
Well, if you're looking at it from a strictly investment perspective,
Mhm.
then sealed will always be king.
And that makes sense.
Um,
Yeah.
if it's if it's a rare title, like some of the ones I mentioned earlier, um, uh, stadium events, what else? Little Samson, Panic Restaurant, Flintstones. Those complete in box, graded, still fetch a nice, good value, right? Like the early print Mario's, right? Those aren't
Mhm.
sealed. Those fetch some decent money, right? But compared to a sealed game, there is quite a bit of difference there for sure. What I think will be the preferred, you know what, it's hard to say, right? Because
Right.
it comes down to personal preference, right? It's the same thing with any other type of hobby, like comic books and stuff, right? Like I'm not I'm not after those super high grades when it comes to comics, right? I'm happy to have something that's rare. So when it comes to grade, I'm not nearly as picky, but I have friends that, grade. So yeah, I think it would just be kind of one of those things where it's personal preference, what that individual is after and what they're willing to spend on it, right? But I think, as video, we've got to remember, video game grading as a hobby is new. It's not, it hasn't been around since 1999 or 2000, right? We're only going back, like WADA, we're going back, what, 5 years, 4 years,
Yeah.
give or take.
WADA
It's not long.
was 2018, right? Was it
Yeah,
2018? Because I
yeah,
remember they were
17,
starting to.
18.
I met the WADA crew at New York City Comic Con 2019 because I was hanging out with Mikey and Danielle, who was Mikey Comics and Nerdy Girl Comics, and they wanted to grab dinner. So I just kind of tagged along with them. It was a great time. And I met the WADA folks, and that's like right when they were starting to launch. And that was so like I believe that they started forming and like doing their thing at the 2018, early 2019 is when I started hearing rumblings or seeing stuff by them. So they were really
Mhm.
nice folks. It was a good dinner. And I'd love to meet them again, but we'll touch on WADA here in a little bit. So now, and this is also an opinion question for you, Rui. What I see a lot of people, and I think we've talked about this before. I understand the idea of getting something graded, right? Something vintage graded, much like an old golden age comic book or a 1980s, 1990s video game like Mario. What's up with getting new games that came out last week graded? I see a lot of that, and I don't know, is there much of a market for that? Because I see a lot of people doing that, and while I understand the FOMO idea of like, okay, well, I want to get this graded now so that I can have it in great condition in 20 years. I don't think, do video games still operate on that same model of like first print, second print, third print, and is it really worth it to get your modern games graded compared to your vintage stuff?
It's a great question, right? If you're going to ask me
Well, thank you. I wrote it
personally,
myself.
yeah, it's, I don't know. For me, I don't necessarily think I would buy a brand new game and send it off to get it graded right away, right? I would
Mhm.
just be happy to, hey, leave it sealed if I don't plan on playing it, and just, let it collect some dust and just don't mess with it, right? If it's a game that down the road it turns out that it was a low print run and it was popular and it's got some decent value to it, then I would send it in. But it's kind of the same argument with like people that grade, comic books that just came out 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that I
right?
don't understand either. I'm gonna need
I
to get an expert to come talk to me about it.
I'm in the dark when it comes to that
Yeah.
too, right?
Modern
But
speculation is a foreign thing to me.
yeah, but with video games, we got to always remember that the super popular titles, they'll eventually come out with something called you probably remember like the player's choice
Mhm.
versions. So, like, a first run of Mario 64 value versus, a complete in box player's choice, there's a big difference. Even with the sealed, there's a big difference, right? And you have some collectors or investors that want nothing to do with player's choice games, right?
Right.
They're just like, nope, this is, it's not what I want. I want the original black box or the original, first version of the game. So with new stuff, right, you keep that in mind as well. And sometimes stuff does come out that is a very limited print run. And if that game ends up, being a really solid game, really good, and they come out with different prints, it's speculation, right? It's just like the
Right.
comic book hobby. It's all speculation, right? And some guys see the value in getting these new games, sending them off to get graded, and some people will pay a bit more to have that game, that brand new game that came out a couple months ago, graded, and it brings them joy and happiness. So
Oh yeah.
teach their own, right? That's what I kind of think it is. But for me personally, no, it's not something I would get into myself.
Yeah, and I'll say that, yeah, to very very well put into each their own. I mean, the whole idea of collecting anything, whether it's comic books or video games or vintage Pez dispensers or die-cast Hot Wheels. I mean, as long as you're happy and you're doing something that you enjoy that's not harming other people, like, you shouldn't be judged for it. As long as you're happy, then that's what's important. But there are certain things that me personally, I can't wrap my head around. Modern video games, modern comics, those are very foreign concepts to me, and so that's why I have guys like you to kind of explain this stuff to me and teach me about it. So now here's a good one, since I'm pretty ignorant in a lot of this. If say me or one of the viewers of this episode were to say, you know what, I think I want to get into collecting video games, what's like an entry point? How does one get? Because I mean, some of these games are so out of reach for most people. I know I can't buy a matte sticker Mario. So how does one like myself get into that community and crowd? Is it through modern games, or is it taking the time to invest a few $100 and moving up, or how would you suggest?
I've had this question posed to me from like friends, family members, things like that. Like, hey, like, what should I get? And I'll give you the same answer that I've always given everyone when it comes to
Okay.
any type of collectible. Collect what you like, right? Collect something not because of the perceived value of it. If you want to get into collecting video games, collect the games that you like. Collect the games that okay, this game cost me $100, but you enjoy it. You remember that game from your childhood, right? It brings you some type of fulfillment at the end of the day, right? Regardless of what it may or may not be worth, right? If you get into any type of hobby, and especially video games in that sense, right? Go out and get just the cart of a game that you enjoyed when you were young on the NES or the SNES or the Genesis. Just get the cart, right? And just, start with carts. And then eventually you may find the need as you grow as a collector to, man, now I want the box to go with that. I want the
Okay.
manual to go with that. But just let it happen organically, right? Don't get into it because of the perceived value to them, right? Or
Right.
or if you're going into it strictly as an investor, then that's a different story, right? But if you're
Right.
just getting into it, just do it because it's something that's going to make you happy, and there's a reason why you're making these purchases. You don't have to get into it and start spending thousands of dollars, right?
Right.
You
Well,
can
and I
spend
like that.
50, 60, and you're fine.
Yeah, well, and I like that point that you made, because like, whereas in other collectible communities, like for example comic books or trading cards, if you want the comic book, you have to buy the comic book, the whole thing, right? Same thing with trading cards. If you want the first edition Charizard, you got to just buy first. But for video games, those things are broken up all the time. I see on eBay, you can buy just a cart by itself. You can buy a box. You can buy the manuals. People sell that. That is a real thing. So you can definitely
Yeah.
put something together and take your time with it. And I think that's a really great piece of advice that maybe not a lot of people think of. I'm sure a lot of people think, well, I want to get into collecting XYZ, so I have to go full in. I have to buy the whole thing. Otherwise, there's no point. But you can really, with that, you can kind of take your time and let yourself ease into it. So I think that's a really really great bit of advisory that I
Yeah.
never would have thought of. So cool. Um,
Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, this is cool. I've got one more question for you. Then I want to talk about some grading stuff, and then I want you to plug your video game swap meet. Um,
Yeah.
but you talked about print numbers earlier. You said if something has a really big print run, how does one find a print run for a video game? Is that announced by the company? Is there a website that keeps track of these things?
Yeah, so Water released specifically for Black Box. So
Mhm.
Black Box games were the very first released games for the NES. NES specifically during the test market when it first came out, and there is like a definitive guide, and I think that's literally the name, Definitive Guide to Black Box Collecting,
Love
and
it.
it breaks everything down for you, right? What to look for, the differences between each one, and it starts from first print all the way to the latest one, and it gives you details, right? There's diagrams and visuals. It's really good. So Water releasing that was a huge help for someone like me because I didn't know anything about it, right? So thanks to Water, yeah, there's a guide for things like that, and obviously the same thing applies for other early release games as well. But specifically the NES is the one where it gets a little tricky with the different prints and things like that. But there is a guidance called the Definitive Black Box Guide by Water Games, and if you Google search it, you'll find it right away. You can download it. It's great. It's a
Okay.
really great guide.
Now, are there similar things for those who might collect PlayStation games like Final Fantasy or like Xbox games from back in the day? Are there similar things like that like Microsoft or Sony have put out? Do you know or?
I I haven't personally seen any, specific guides like the Water one for the black box games for other versions, but
Mm.
there's so many communities and forums on Reddit and things like that where people have this knowledge. They know already exactly what it is, what you're
Right.
looking for each print. And if you join one of these, communities, you'll be able to get all the information you need just from other like-minded people that have a bit more experience in the
That's
hobby.
true.
So the information is out there though.
See, now I do love Reddit and Instagram just because of the communities that you can find online. I would assume that I mean, for anybody who's new and looking into it, I would assume you go to what, like our video games or, hashtag video games or video game collecting, and you can find several different collectors that use that hashtag, and you kind of build your community from there and ask around. So
Exactly.
that's probably pretty awesome. Now, on to since we've mentioned WADA so many times now, I know that they kind of came out with a bang, and they sold that Mario book or that Mario book Mario game that went for 100 grand or whatever have you, and they kind of put video game collectors or video game collecting, for lack of a better term, kind of on the map for a lot of people. But prior to WADA, there was also the VGA, the Video Game Authority, that's still operating and running. And now CGC is also coming out with their own grading service. I don't know of any other third party grading companies besides those three. Um, but WADA themselves seems to have stirred up a ton of controversy. Now, like I said, I don't know anything about the video game community or collecting, and I've met the WADA people. They were all very nice to me. So I don't have anything negative to say, but I'm also, just for the sake of discussion, I'm curious what I guess your thoughts are maybe on these different controversies of creating bubbles or manipulating a market or something like that. Like, do you have any thoughts on this that you'd like to share? Because I'm educate me. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm sure you watched the same video that I watched on YouTube. That deep dive. I forget what it's called right now.
Something by like
Um,
Mr. Jobst, something like that. Yeah.
yeah, something like that. Yeah, you know what? It was pretty controversial. Some of the things that he pointed out, and the thing is, when it comes to things like shell bidding, for example, that
Mhm.
exists
Right.
within any type of hobby, any type of auction house. It exists. It can't be avoided. It's going to happen, right? So the fact that it's happening for video games wasn't really a surprise to me. I guess the only thing that, I was left a little disappointed with WADA was with things such as, people who had like a direct affiliation with the company were knowingly going out, purchasing games, having them graded, and then selling them on eBay or other auction sites, right? Without naming any specific sites. So that's the part where I was kind of like, well, that's kind of shitty, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're gonna come out like this, and like I get it. I get where they're coming from and why they would want to do that. But if you really want to be that company that people 100% trust, and you clearly list on your website that anyone who works for the company does not have any of their games graded or own a WADA graded game, you come out and say that, people believe it, right? And they want to believe it. So I think they've kind of hurt their reputation when it comes to that specifically. And then the other thing that I wasn't a big fan of either, and something I questioned right from the start was, maybe not the first couple of years because it takes time to build up data, but a census, right? There was this perceived rarity for certain games that I think if they had a census and people knew, how many, Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, or that they had graded, sealed, how many were out there, people would be able to place bids, more confidently, knowing that, okay, since WADA started, they've only graded 3 of these sealed at 8.0 or 9.0. Right. Okay, there's some value there, right? At least at this point in time, there's value. But they didn't release these numbers. They didn't tell people this, right? So you had, N64 games that are sealed selling for crazy numbers, $100,000, $200,000, when in fact, once a census report came out and, it came to light, right, there was a lot of these sealed Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64 games out there already. Like quite a few. We're not talking like 5 or 10. We're talking like 30, 40 plus, right? So yeah, is that game worth what it was worth before? Now that we know how many are out there? Absolutely not. It can't be. It just can't be, right?
It's just basic how a market works. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So by keeping that information, were they purposely trying to manipulate the market? I don't know. I like to think they weren't. I really do. But I do think that was, on their end, bad move. You should have come out and just, as you grade them, give us a census report, just like CGC does, right? Right. Just be transparent, right?
Now, do you think they've rebuilt their reputation somewhat since then for whatever it may have damaged? Because I know that there's a good group of people that were pretty salty about it. Do you think they've kind of rebuilt since then?
Well, you know what? They still are the go-to when it comes to it. They have released a census report for NES games. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, I remember that.
I'm an NES guy. So you know what? This controversy, I think something good may have come out at the end of it, right? We are getting these reports now. We do have a census for certain games and things like that, and they're kind of forced to give us that information now. So I think that they will come out of this a lot better. I know that they were also recently bought out. They moved head offices, things like that. So they're backlogged and they're trying to catch up and stuff. So people are still submitting, right? People still submitting. HA and all of the other auction houses are still selling their stuff. Has it hurt them? As far as value goes, I know it has. I know that the video game market has taken a bit of a dip. Is it because of that specifically? Maybe. May have played a little bit of a role in it, but I think that the market just grew way too quick. It was unnatural. You know what I mean? Like if you look at it on a graph,
big
right?
Hype bubble.
Yeah, like comic books, like over time, like anything normal, it grew. But video games was like, you had a $100,000 game within a year of these things getting graded. Like, what the hell? Like, if you go back in time, you look at that first comic book that broke 100K, it took years. It took like a lot of time for something to happen. And we're talking about pieces of paper from the 40s and 30s.
Well, and I'm hoping that a lot of people are calling it a bubble. I don't necessarily want to call the video game community or collecting boom a bubble. I'm going to say that there's a lot of hype about it up front, and I think that it's cooling down, but I don't think it's popping. I think it's just going to find its kind of place and like plateau as opposed to going all the way down. Like, it went up and now it went down. There we go. Now it's kind of finding its way in the collectibles community. Now, what about what about VGA and CGC games? Do you think CGC video games is going to be an optimal or really decent, competitor for WATA to be worried about? And what about VGA? What do you think of them? I mean, they've been around forever and they just kind of stay quiet and do their own thing. And I like I have some figures graded by AFA, which is one of their subsidiaries. So what do you have any opinions on either of those guys?
Yeah, VGA is kind of, I don't know, like for me, I knew it existed, but
Mhm.
for whatever reason, the hobby just, I don't know, didn't embrace it as far as video games go, right? Yeah, people were submitting, they're getting things graded, and they've been around way longer than WATA. But for one reason or another, personally, I there was nothing in me that ever thought, oh yeah, I want to send my games to VGA to get graded. I don't know why. Maybe it was just bad marketing or something. But I do like VGA as a company because they do more than one thing and they offer grading. It's not, we only grade this, and that, right? You can send, if you have a sealed N64 box, right? You can send that in and they'll case it for you. They'll grade it. They'll do
Right.
that, right? Whereas WATA doesn't do that. CGC, I think it's interesting what they're doing. I think the fact that they are creating a division to grade games shows that game grading and game collecting is here to stay, because a company like CGC doesn't invest that kind of money, effort, time to create a division like this on something that they think is just going to be a fad, right? It's
Right.
clearly something that's going to stick around. I'm interested. I'm interested to see what they do. I'm interested to see how they grade. What are they going to follow the grading standards of WATA, right? Because WATA, for example, they grade the game, and if it's a sealed game, they grade the game, and then there's a separate grade for the seal, right? Which is kind of like grade school grades, A plus, A plus plus, B, C, that kind of
Right.
stuff. Are they going to stick to that, right? VGA has different type of grading as well, right? They go by like the 80s,
It's a 100
90s,
scale, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
100 scale. So, there'll be some interesting things that come out with CGC. I'm interested in what their cases are going to look like, what their labels are going to look like. I think at the end of the day, I'm a believer that competition is a good thing for us
Oh yeah.
because it keeps all of the other companies doing their best. When you only have one big player in the game, they'll do whatever the hell they want. You know what I mean? They'll because they know, hey, you got nowhere else to go. You want
Right.
you want your shit
Yeah.
graded, you got to use us.
Right. See, I would like to get my video game collection graded at some point, since now I own the virtual games on like my 3DS or whatever. But I'm waiting to see what the CGC cases look like. I do like uniformity, and I have my CGC comic books. I have my CGC graded cards. I want to get my games graded by CGC, but I also want to make sure. I mean, price is a really big thing. One of the reasons why I haven't gone to WATA yet is nothing out of controversy, but it's just simply that the cost of grading for me personally is like I was outpriced on it. Like I couldn't justify it. So I'm hoping that CGC's prices are a little more reasonable. If not, I might end up waiting for VGA to reopen their basic grading tiers, just because it is the most cost effective for me at this particular moment. But I think it's more so that I want to have my video games protected as opposed to a high grade, because they're not going to be for sale. They're for me to have and like give to my kids because they're something that brought me a lot of joy, you know. So that's
That's really interesting. And I have a question for you
sure,
on that topic, if you don't mind.
of course.
So I was actually having this discussion with a friend the other day, and we were talking about like, why do you get something graded? Is it because you want a grade so that you can increase the value, or is it because you want it encapsulated and protected? So the fact that you mentioned that you want it protected, it makes me question, okay, well, you do know that there are acrylic cases that you can buy that are perfectly fit for Game Boy games, boxes, things like that. And if that's what you're going for, then why wouldn't you just do that? Something you can order and it's brought to your house and you can do yourself at home, versus sending a submission in to have it, encapsulated and sealed and graded with a sticker and, identified and everything. Are you trying to get something else out of that as well, like verification or certification?
So idea and thought process behind that, because I've actually talked about this before, but when it comes to things like that, so for example, stepping into more expensive stuff, I've got a Marvel Family #1, right? First appearance of Black Adam, 1945, I think. That's a very rare and expensive book, and I know that there are definitely ways to have a book protected very well without needing to pay for the cost of getting it graded. The
Mhm.
reason why I have them graded anyhow is because, yes, while they're for me and my personal collection to keep and not to sell, say that, God forbid, somebody, in my family's in a car accident. Say that I were to suddenly die, and my kids need money. Then these things would be graded. They're certified by a verified company that has a good, solid reputation. There's a sales history behind these books. There's a grade to help determine a market value, and these are tools to help my kids, my family, essentially, if they fall in hard times, sell these things off and take care of themselves. So that's
Mhm.
my philosophy behind getting them graded. I keep them, I get them graded to keep them safe and in good condition for my eyes to just stare at, because that's what you do when you collect stuff. You buy things that you like and you look at them and you covet them, like Smeagol. but
Yeah.
but if I were to, yeah, like imagine tomorrow I get struck by lightning and I die, sure, my kids will get a life insurance payout, but also, like, they're going to have these expensive comics that could cover their college tuition, and I want them to be able to not have to do extra steps to get them
Okay.
sold off and taken care of. Like, it's already done for you. You don't need to figure it out. You can just sell it off and live your life. So that's been my philosophy behind it so far.
Okay. So your
Yeah.
motivation for sending things in to get graded, even though you plan on keeping it, is because of future down the road type stuff.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's cool. I respect that. Like for me, it's like my answer to that same question. And when my friend asked me that, I told him it's not necessarily to get, I want the highest grade so that I can maximize my payout. For me, a lot of the time is I want it protected. And I believe that encapsulating something and it's sealed in there, you're good. That's the best way to protect something, definitely. But it's also a way to verify and certify that I know exactly what I got in there. And, like a third party professional company inspected this and is verifying that this is exactly that, right? Because there's
Hmm.
just like with any hobby, video games, there's reproductions of them made, and, there's scams out there and stuff like that. And when you buy it loose, you're rolling the dice sometimes,
Oh yeah,
unless you
you
really
want
have
to
a
make
good
sure it's,
eye. Yeah.
yeah.
So you buy it graded, even though it's not the highest grade or anything like that, but you buy it graded, you know exactly what you're getting, right? And that's what I really like about grading, as a collector myself, right? Because as you know, I don't go after the super high grade stuff, right? I just
Right.
like it. I like it encapsulated, and I like it to be, like with comics, right? There's no restoration on this, right? Things like that, right?
Yeah.
It's more the
I think
certifying
that's
it.
that verification is really good, because I mean, and that goes to my thing too, is, if they're verified, then my kiddos wouldn't have to do any extra work. They it is real, it is authentic, it is graded, it is right there, so you don't have to, like, worry, like, oh, did my dad buy a bunch of fake stuff, am I out, like, it's real, it's there. Yeah, I've got a very good healthy stack in my safe deposit box now. Now we're just crossing that hour mark, so I want to touch on two things before we close things out. So you do some mods with consoles. You've posted some stuff on your Instagram. You do a few different things for, like, docking stations. Tell me about that. What do you do, and how'd you get into it? Can people hire you to do that stuff? Like,
Yeah, like so it just kind of started, like I got this creative bone in me where, like sometimes I just get this idea and I gotta get it out, right? So it just kind
reasonable.
of started, yeah, with video games as I got more into the hobby, right? I started learning how to properly clean these things, right? Then I wanted to learn how do they work, right? How do they operate? And with the older technology, it's surprisingly not easy, but it's fairly simple to work and mod these things, right? So, I would buy something like an NES console that's like, the case is completely yellowed or busted or
Right.
whatever it is.
Totally destroyed.
And just with the purpose to breathe some new life into it, right? So at first it just kind of started off as like a Frankenstein project where I would take one thing and another thing and just, put it together and see what it turned out like. And yeah, people started, they liked them. And that motivated me to just kind of keep going. So I just kept buying these broken consoles that I knew I could fix, and started, just creating different things with them, right? So for example, like that, I did a Legend of Zelda Switch dock. So
I know
with the
that thing was
Switch,
so cool. Oh my god.
it's actually right. Wait, what hand am I using?
I
Right
know. I hate
there,
that it's like.
right there. That's the one.
Oh, yep. I see
That's
it.
the one there. So I bought like this wholesale lot of broken GameCubes,
Mhm.
and I just basically, took the Switch docks, tore them apart, and just kind of built them into it. And the GameCube specifically, because especially in the competitive Smash Bros. Scene, you want to use that GameCube controller, because the GameCube controller, this people may not agree with me, that's fine, is the best controller when it comes to Smash Bros. And that's why they have like GameCube controller connections for the Switch. So I figured, okay, I'll just use an actual GameCube console. I'll replace the ports with these, GameCube connectors that you can use on the Switch, and dock a Switch in there and use the actual GameCube ports, to use your GameCube controller. In my mind, I thought that'd be pretty cool, right? So I just started creating these different ones, and I did a Zelda one. I did a couple of other ones. Did a Pokemon themed
The
one,
ones,
and sorry,
the
go ahead.
ones on your Instagram are just like, they're so cool. I
Yeah,
love them,
yeah.
man. I've been meaning to actually, off podcast subject. I have been meaning to ask you like how much one would run, because I totally want one. Those are rad, man. Those are so cool. Like,
So this is the thing, right? Like
mhm.
one of my most popular ones was I took an old Ninja Turtles van and I
Mhm.
turned it into like there's a screen on it, and there's an SNES built into it, and you basically can play SNES on this old retro toy, right? The toy was broken, first of all. I just want people to know that. That's why I did it on it. I didn't destroy a perfectly good toy. It was
Okay,
busted.
action figure collectors, you heard him. So.
Yes, I get a lot of heat on that sometimes. You took a perfectly good toy. No, it wasn't. um, but the thing is that the amount of hours it takes to do this, right?
Mhm.
The parts, right? The supplies, things like that. At the end of the day, for me to recreate this as a retail product, for someone, the amount of time and effort and everything it takes for me to complete it, the price would be astronomical, right?
Right.
It's not one of those things that is easy enough to do where you can mass produce it and offer it publicly for a decent price, right? So there's no point of me, unless someone wants to spend 500 $600 on something like that. There's no point of me putting in the man hours and all the time into it to do that, right? So
That
it's
makes
they're
sense.
mainly just they're just projects for me, right? Something for me to do. I enjoy it. I like it. And sometimes I just kind of give them away sometimes, right? Like I've done some projects for friends and family where, I do it, right? It's didn't cost me that much to do it, but I give it to them, even though it took a lot of time, but it makes them happy, right? And I get the satisfaction of making them happy with something like that. So yeah, that's why I do it, but that's also why I don't offer it as like a public thing, right?
Mm.
And
Okay.
and it's pretty common when it comes to the modding community, right? If you wanted like a specifically modded thing, like let's say you wanted a portable N64, you're spending like $1,500 $1,600 on that.
A lot of
It takes
money
a
for
very
that.
special person to want to spend that on a portable N64, right? That's why you don't see them, mass marketed or anything like that.
Yeah, I follow a few Game Boy Color modder folks on Instagram. I'd like to get myself a Game Boy Color mod with like a backlit screen. That's
Oh,
one I've
yeah.
been meaning to do that for a while. One that can play both Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games. That's like something that's been on my list for a long time. So I need to hunt somebody down that could do something like that. But I digress. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, Rudy, is I want you to really plug yourself. You run a video game swap. It's Zach and Rui's. Did I just say Rudy? Oh my God, I'm sorry. I've been a long day. Zach and Rui's Video Game Swap. Tell me about
That's right.
that. You run a whole thing. So how did that come about, and when is the next one, and how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, so it's really fresh. It's really new. Zach and I met at a swap meet like maybe 10 years ago or so. And since then we became really good friends, right? The video game hobby brought us together, and we've maintained a really good friendship. And one of the things that we do most often together is attend these swap meets. So a long time ago, maybe 10, I think the last one was maybe 6 years ago, there was a regular swap meet that was held here where I live. And it used to be like the biggest one in Ontario, right? It was like this area was like the mecca of retro video games. But then it stopped. It stopped, and these different swaps started popping up around the rest of the province, and Zach and I would attend them. And we went to one back in, like, I think it was November or October. And I don't know, man, we drove out like maybe an hour and a half, almost 2 hours to get there. And we got there, and it was just so underwhelming.
Oh,
And
no.
we were just like, we didn't have high expectations or anything, but we were just kind of like, on the drive back, I'm like, dude, like, we could do something like this, but so much better. And then he's like, let's fucking do it then. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, let's do this. Let's just fucking do it. Let's stop talking about it. Let's just do it. So we ended up getting a venue for it. And once we had the venue, it was just a matter of marketing, getting the vendors. Zach's been collecting video games a lot longer than I have. So he's made a lot of connections and things like that. So we were able to get the tables filled pretty quick. And then it was just a matter of marketing it, right? But one thing that we really wanted to do with our swap meet that was a little bit different was, Zach's been a vendor at swap meets before. I've done a couple as well. And one thing that we always noticed was, whenever as a vendor at these swap meets, you know, you're basically, here's your table, see you later, right? There was no proper staffing, someone coming around asking, do you need anything, right? Providing us with water or, some snacks or whatever. Because these guys, they're standing behind these tables for like 5-6 hours straight.
Ever. Yeah. All day.
Exactly.
Nonstop.
Exactly. So we wanted to make ours a little bit different. So with our swap meet, neither Zach or I had our own tables. We were staff members, and we just wanted to give 100% focus on the vendors that were there and the people attending it, right? We wanted to make sure that everything was running smoothly and good. And, we did swag bags. We, for the VIP people that bought tickets in advance, we provided like little backpacks with our branding on it, just little things like that we did differently, right? And
That's really cool.
Yeah, and it worked out. You know what? I got to admit, the Saturday night before, I was shitting my pants, man. I got no sleep that night because I'm like, shit, we did this on Easter long weekend. Is this even people going to show up? Like,
was it a 2-day event or a 3-day event?
It's just one day.
It was all one day.
One single day. Yeah, just one single day. And
how was the turnout?
It was great.
It looked like a success, right?
It was a success. We had well over 200 people attend on a Sunday. The event ran from 11 to 3. We went around, we talked to the vendors after. Every single one of them said, yep, next time you guys have one, I'm in for sure. We got a lot of good feedback from people attending it. And yeah, the next one, we don't have a date set, but we're not necessarily gonna make it bigger in the sense that we're gonna, get more space and get more vendors. We may get a few more tables for a few more vendors, but we're gonna get a bit more space because we want to hold a video game tournament throughout the day.
Oh, that'd be cool.
And bring in that kind of crowd as well, right? So people that aren't necessarily collectors looking to buy stuff, but they just love gaming, right? So we're planning on having a Smash Bros tournament throughout the day. We're going to have a trophy for the winner, things like that. And yeah, just turn the event, turn it from just a swap meet into like a legit event, right? With other things built around it. And yeah, we plan on doing it at least twice a year. We don't want to do overkill and have one every couple of months or anything like that. Right. We want to really make it something kind of special that people look forward to happening. I couldn't be happier with the way it turned out. It was great.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate that, because the best kind of con is one that's done by fans who know how fans or collectors, or people in that community want the con or the show to be run. So I think I mean, guys like you are the best guys to run one of these shows. So that's also for any of my Canadian friends or friends who live right there at the U.S. Canada border. I mean, Zach and Rui's video game swap. I mean, and you said you haven't figured out a date yet, right?
We haven't figured out a date. We're
You guys
thinking
have a
probably
website?
fall. Yep, ZRSwapmeet.com, and
Okay.
it's always updated. And yeah, the date, we should be having a new confirmed date probably sometime in the fall, within the next few weeks or so.
Okay. Well, I will make sure to link the website in the description below for any of our viewers who are curious to attend, because that sounds awesome. If I didn't live on the other side of the country, I'd love to come. So, but that is really cool, man, and I appreciate that. And Rui, so we're about an hour and 15 minutes, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and be here with me, talk to me about video games and your experience in the video game community. It has been an invaluable experience, because I don't know anything about this stuff. So I appreciate you educating me and anybody else who's tuned into this. So, really from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you and I thank you very much.
Thanks, Devin. It was a pleasure. I was looking forward to this, and yeah, it's fun. When you're talking about something you're passionate about, it's always a good time, right? And
It's
with
a great time.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you, man. This was great.
Absolutely. All right, Rui. Well, I'm gonna wrap up with these folks. If you can hang tight with me, all right? All right, friends. Well, there we have it. That was Rui, aka Driving For Collectibles on Instagram. I'm going to make sure that his Instagram is linked below, as well as the website to his comic swap up in Canada. Make sure to give him a follow. If you want to continue to support this channel, make sure that you like, comment, subscribe, all that good old fashioned YouTube self-promotion BS. If you guys want to keep the conversation going about video games, comic books, or any other level of collectibles, make sure you guys join my Discord. You can find the link at my Discord's Instagram page, which is the Collector's Room, or at Collector's Room. Feel free to drop in. I run it with my buddy Nate, and we love to talk comic books, video games, trading cards, action figures, original art, pulp magazines, and everything collectible. And we are there basically 24/7. There's always somebody, because it's an international community, so there's always somebody there talking about some form of collectibles, and we'd love to have you join us. But that is it for today's broadcast. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and yeah, we will go ahead and look forward to seeing you hopefully next Saturday.